welcome to the deep dive. You wanted to get a quick yet thorough understanding of fascinating topics packed with surprising facts, and well, today we're delivering.
We are. We're plunging into Alfred Russel Wallace's The Malay Archipelago. It's just this incredible treasure trove of observations from a really pivotal time in scientific exploration.
Exactly. We've got excerpts straight from Wallace's own accounts detailing his amazing journey through this, well, unbelievably biodiverse region.
And our mission really is to pull out the most compelling, the most insightful nuggets from his experiences, give you a real shortcut to understanding this key work.
And what a time for discovery. I mean, Wallace was constantly bumping into the unknown.
Constantly.
He writes about finding, almost like he can't believe it himself, 1,000 species of longhorn beetles in one place.
That's wild.
And 900 of them were completely new to science.
Yeah.
Just highlights the sheer scale of life out there that nobody knew about.
It really does. A powerful reminder, of how much of the natural world was still being unveiled back in the 19th century.
So the Malay Archipelago, it covers a lot of ground, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A sweeping panorama. Everything from the physical geography, the amazing variety of life, to his encounters with the different peoples living on these islands. It's a really comprehensive snapshot.
Okay, let's dive in then. Something that really jumped out at me first was his insights into, well, what we now call island biogeography.
Yes, that's fundamental to the book.
He spent a lot of time looking at how the animals on islands like Java, Sumatra, Borneo, how they show these really striking similarities to animals in mainland Southern Asia.
And what's so fascinating is how he used those patterns, the distribution of animals, to figure out past geological connections. It's quite clever, really.
How so?
Well, he looked at these large mammals, elephants, tapirs, rhinos found on the islands, and he reasoned quite logically that they couldn't possibly have swum across the seas that separate the islands today.
Right, the distances are too big.
Exactly. So their presence was strong evidence, almost proof, that there must have been land bridges connecting these islands to the mainland in the past.
So it wasn't just that they were there, but what their being there implied about the Earth's history.
Precisely. It pointed to the dynamic nature of land masses over geological time, a pretty significant idea back then.
And it wasn't only the big guys, was it? He saw similar patterns with smaller creatures, too.
That's right. Even with birds and insects, he found that the broader families in genera were largely consistent with the Asian continent.
And sometimes the species were identical.
In many cases, yes. Identical species across these now separated lands. Birds are a great example. You might think they could just fly across.
Yeah, easily.
But Wallace pointed out that many non-water birds, especially the perching ones, were often just as limited by water barriers as mammals were. He mentions Java having loads of bird species that never cross the 15-mile strait to Sumatra.
15 miles, that's nothing for a bird, you'd think.
It shows how significant even relatively small geographical barriers can be.
Okay, this is where it gets really neat.
Mm-hmm.
He noticed that Java seemed to have the most distinct birds and insects.
Mm-hmm. Leading him to suggest it was probably the first island to break away from the mainland.
And then Borneo next.
Borneo next, with its own unique features. And Sumatra seemed the most recent split because its animal life was so similar to the Malay Peninsula, that bit sticking down from mainland Asia.
Right, so a sequence of separation.
Exactly. And then he ties this biological evidence to the geology. He notes the seas between these islands are surprisingly shallow.
And the volcanoes.
And the intense volcanic activity in Sumatra and Java. Put it all together, the biology, the shallow seas, the volcanoes. And he concluded that fairly recently, geologically speaking, Asia must have extended much further southeast. It included what are now Java, Sumatra, and Borneo.
That's a powerful synthesis of different lines of evidence.
Absolutely. Really foundational work for biogeography.
Okay, so moving from the animals and geology, let's talk about his encounters with people. He gives some really vivid snapshots, starting with Malacca.
Right, Malacca. He described it as a real crossroads. A bustling, diverse port city. You had Chinese, Malays, descendants of the Portuguese settlers, the English.
A proper melting pot.
Totally. And interestingly, he comments on the Portuguese spoken there.
What about it?
He called it grammatically mutilated, which is, a fascinating glimpse into how languages change and adapt over time, especially in isolated or mixed communities.
Language evolution in action. Then he heads into the interior of Borneo, right? Spends time with the Dayak people.
Yes. And his descriptions really emphasize their hospitality, especially in the communal head house.
Which wasn't just for heads, despite the name.
Yeah. No, it was the social center, the place strangers were welcomed, where community matters were discussed. Really vital.
He also describes their appearance, doesn't he? Simple, but elegant in a way.
Yeah, it talks about the chawat sort of waistcloth, often with specific patterns, and then ornaments like brass earrings, bead necklaces, armlets. It gives you a feel for their distinct cultural aesthetic.
And the travel itself sounds quite adventurous. River journeys in narrow boats.
Propelled by Dayaks using bamboo poles, he actually says it reminded him strongly of his earlier travels in South America.
Those little connections across continents really bring the narrative alive.
They do. And speaking of bringing things alive, his description of the durian fruit.
Ah, yes, the durian. People tend to love it or hate it. Wallace was definitely in the love it camp.
Oh, completely. He goes on and on about its unique flavor, this rich, custardy pulp,
Mm.
the whole experience of eating it fresh. He even mentions how the Dayaks preserved it.
Though the preserved version maybe didn't appeal to him quite as much.
Apparently, it had a rather strong smell, even for him. But he famously called the fresh durian the king of fruits.
Alongside the orange is the queen, I think.
That's the one. It's funny how something like a fruit can become such a memorable point of connection, isn't it?
It really is. He also talks a lot about bamboo, how incredibly versatile it was for the Dayaks.
Absolutely essential. He saw it used for everything. Building houses, making baskets, fish traps.
Water vessels, cooking pots.
Cooking pots, yeah. They'd cook rice or vegetables in green bamboo tubes over the fire. Even pipes for water, like little aqueducts.
It really highlights how resourceful people are, using what's around them. That ingenuity comes across strongly.
Definitely. A fantastic example of adapting to the environment.
He also visited a place on Mount Santabong, a lodge used by the English Raja, James Brooke.
Right, mentioning the difficult terrain, but also the reward and abundance of fruit, like mangosteens and landsats. Delicious rewards.
And his observations on Dayak character are interesting too. He noted their honesty
Particularly that they wouldn't steal European belongings, which seemed to impress him.
and generally peaceful, apart from the headhunting tradition, obviously,
Hmm?
and moderation in food and drink.
Though he did also perceive a certain slowness or lack of urgency in getting things done, a different pace of life, perhaps.
He also made an interesting observation about their population size.
Yes, that Dayak women seem to have fewer children than European families at the time. He speculated this might be why their population seemed relatively stable. It's a very early kind of demographic observation.
Quite perceptive. But he wasn't uncritical of European influence, was he?
No, not at all. He expressed real concerns about the impact of trade, especially introducing things like alcohol, opium, and easy credit to, as he put it, uncivilized peoples.
Worried it would lead to problems.
Yeah, demoralization, debt. It's a pretty sober reflection on the downsides of that kind of contact.
Okay, let's shift focus now to Java. Wallace seems incredibly impressed by the agriculture there.
Oh, massively impressed. He describes these extensive, intricate systems of terracing and irrigation for rice cultivation.
Rivaling China, he says.
Rivaling China, yeah. High praise.
Yeah.
It points to a really sophisticated, long-established agricultural society. The scale of it clearly amazed him.
And it wasn't just agriculture. Java had these incredible ancient ruins too.
Right. The Hindu temples at Prambanan, he mentions Lorojongran and Chandisewa specifically. He was struck by the artistry, the scale, tangible links to Java's deep history.
And even within Java, he noticed differences in wildlife, didn't he?
Yes, distinct natural history between West and East Java, more unique biodiversity. He mentions catching some really rare and beautiful butterflies there, like Papilio arjuna.
And the bird-winged butterflies, they're spectacular, aren't they?
Huge, stunningly colored. Finding a new one would have been a major event for him.
He also talks about climbing mountains in Java and seeing changes in the plant life with altitude.
Altitudinal zonation, yeah. He observed how, as you went higher, the plants changed, and eventually species more typical of European climates started appearing.
And he connected this to the Ice Age.
Exactly. To the idea of a past glacial epoch forcing plants to migrate, with some finding refuge in cooler, higher altitudes in the tropics as the climate warmed again. It's him connecting local observations to big global scientific ideas. Very smart.
Okay, let's hop over to Sumatra now. He describes Palembang.
As a river town, houses built on stilts or rafts right on the water, lots of Chinese and Arab traders.
And tame the squirrels.
And tame squirrels on a sacred hill, taking food from people, a charming little detail. Suggests a different kind of human-wildlife interaction there.
Though life wasn't always easy, He mentions food scarcity in villages during the wet season, mostly just rice.
Yes, but interestingly, he also notes that people, even when food was simple, often wore quite elaborate silver ornaments.
A bit of a contrast.
It is. Shows that cultural value isn't always just about basic needs.
Then there's Lombok. He visited a park there, Gunung Sari.
With Hindu-style buildings, ponds with tame fish, even deer that were almost tame, it seems like a place where nature and culture blended quite gracefully.
And he found new species there, too. A kingfisher and a ground thrush.
Yep. Halcyon fulgitis and Zuthera andromeda, still finding new things, Lombok was clearly rewarding.
He also picked up on some local legends in Lombok.
Yeah, like the story of the Raja who supposedly met a mountain spirit, but it was really a ploy to get people to build roads.
Huh. Clever politics.
And the creation of sacred daggers, krises, that were believed to ward off diseases. These stories give you insights into belief systems and social control.
Okay, further east now, to Timor. Sounds like it wasn't his favorite place.
Well, the main town, Kupang, he found pretty unhealthy. Swampy, high risk of fever, especially for newcomers.
And less wildlife generally.
Seemed that way to him compared to other islands, except for butterflies. He noted a relative scarcity of other animals.
But the butterflies were good.
Oh, yes. He still managed to collect some significant rare ones, like the swallowtails, Papilio anomices, and P. lyris. Timor had its own distinct fauna.
He also mentions finding copper there.
Native copper, yeah, found right on the coast, which naturally led to local stories about a whole mountain made of copper.
And his bee hunting adventure.
Right. Where the locals seemed totally immune to stings while he got painfully attacked. A funny but telling anecdote about local knowledge and adaptation versus the newcomer experience.
He also thought about Timor's connection to Australia, geologically.
He did. He noted an underwater bank suggesting a past closer link. But crucially, the types of animals were very different. No shared big mammal or bird groups like between the Western Islands and Asia.
So no land bridge there.
That was his conclusion. Proximity didn't mean a land connection. Again, using biology to interpret geology.
All right, heading north now to Sulawesi, or Celebes as he called it. He experienced earthquakes there.
Yes, in Manado. He gives this really vivid account of the ground shaking, the houses swaying, people running out. You feel the fear and confusion.
Must have been quite something. He also talks about the Dutch colonial system there.
Specifically in Minahasa, yeah. The government controlled coffee cultivation, essentially using it as a form of taxation. He outlines the system, its intended benefits for the locals, but also hints at criticisms regarding trade restrictions. A complex picture of colonialism.
And more geology, hot springs, volcanic activity.
Yeah, further evidence of the intense subterranean heat in that region. It's a geologically very active part of the world.
And then on Bacon Island, another big discovery.
Huge. A new bird-winged butterfly, Ornithoptera croesus, the golden bird wing. You can almost feel his excitement jumping off the page, finding something that spectacular. That's what drove him.
Absolutely. He also briefly mentioned Seram, meeting Papuan people there.
Noting their physical differences from Malays, their customs.
In Gorong Island, noting its coral origins, just ticking off the diversity.
Exactly. Each island group had its unique aspects.
Okay, let's get to the Aru Islands. Sounds like tough traveling.
Very tough. He talks about struggling through deep mud just to get anywhere inland. Really challenging conditions.
But it was worth it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This is where he finally got the king bird of paradise.
Yes. Paradisa regia, a species he desperately wanted to find. He describes the moment of getting a perfect specimen, the sheer beauty of the bird, the intense emotion. It's a real highlight of the book, a collector's dream fulfilled.
He also observes the Papuan people in Aru, contrasting them with Malays.
Describing them as maybe more impulsive, more demonstrative, possibly, he thought, with higher intellect in some ways, and definitely with artistic inclinations. He noted their carvings.
He mentions some local beliefs, too, about lost chiefs and white men.
Yeah, a story about strangers arriving long ago and the chief disappearing, and this belief that Wallace, as a white man, might somehow know what happened. He felt they saw him as a bit of a magician. Fascinating cultural encounter.
And Aru was important for trade.
Very. Exports like trepang, that sea cucumber, mother of pearl, and of course the skins of birds of paradise. He also admired the clever boxes the locals made from leaves.
Though he did have trouble with rats getting into his stuff.
Yes, a less glamorous side of fieldwork, constant battle against pests.
He also visited the Kai Islands.
Noting again Papuan inhabitants, distinct from Malays in language and temperament, and very skilled boat builders.
And then Waigeo Island. another key spot for birds of paradise.
Absolutely. This is where he found the red bird of paradise, Paradisea rubra, unique to that island. He even built himself a little hut near the forest to observe and collect.
He noted Waigeo had a mixed population, too.
Yeah, suggesting migrations and intermingling between people from nearby Halmahera and New Guinea. Papuan language was dominant, reinforcing the New Guinea connection.
And this absence of Aboriginal groups on some islands helped him solidify his ideas about Malay and Papuan races being distinct.
Yes, the patterns of human distribution, like animal distribution, told a story about historical movements and separations.
Which brings us nicely to his general thoughts on the birds of paradise themselves. Such iconic creatures.
And surrounded by myth for centuries. He talks about the old names Manuk Dewata, birds of the gods, birds of the sun, and the bizarre early European belief that they had no feet and lived perpetually in the air.
Where did that idea come from?
From the way the skins were first prepared by locals for trade, they often removed the legs and wings. So the first specimens arriving in Europe looked like they were just plumes and bodies.
Amazing. Wallace helped clear that up.
Definitely. He provides these incredibly detailed descriptions of the male's stunning plumage, contrasting it with the very plain females, like the greater bird of paradise, Paradisea apoda, the footless one, ironically named based on that old myth.
He describes other species, too.
Oh, yes. The scale-breasted paradise bird, the paradise pie, really bringing these birds to life with his words. He also gives credit to the local hunters, saying their knowledge of animal habits was generally spot on.
But it wasn't easy for him to get specimens sometimes.
No, because the trade was often tightly controlled by local chiefs. It required careful negotiation, patience, and money.
He also contrasts the moral characteristics he perceived between Papuans and Malays.
Yeah, that's a more subjective part of his observations, reflecting 19th century perspectives, but it's part of his overall account of the human diversity he encountered.
So, wrapping it all up, this deep dive into Wallace's Malay Archipelago, it really gives you an incredible window into that region in the 1850s and 60s.
Absolutely. The sheer biodiversity, the geological insights, the cultural encounters, it's all there. His work laid so much groundwork for understanding island biogeography, evolution, and just the richness of life in that part of the world.
Hopefully this has given you, our listener, that quick but thorough understanding we promised. A journey through a landmark piece of scientific travel writing.
And what I find really intriguing is that contrast you mentioned earlier between the old myths about things like birds of paradise, those footless wonders,
Right.
and the detailed, factual, observed reality that Wallace worked so hard to document. It shows the power of firsthand exploration and careful science.
Definitely. We hope this deep dive has sparked some aha moments for you about, how nature works, the connections across the globe, and the incredible diversity of human cultures.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Consider how today's science builds on what Wallace and others started, with genetics, satellite imaging, all our modern tools. What new discoveries are still waiting out there in places like the Malay Archipelago? And what would Wallace think of our current understanding of evolution, or perhaps our conservation challenges?
Fascinating questions. Makes you think.